Hi everyone, it's Ricky Spencer with our Sociology Media Voices series, and today I have the absolute pleasure of talking to one of my heroes that I've kind of followed throughout the 80s through to now, and that's David Menadue, and he has an Order of Australia medal. He has lived with HIV since his diagnosis in 1984. He was a founding member of the National People Living with AIDS Coalition, which is now called the National Association of People with HIV Australia, and People with AIDS Victoria, now called the Living Positive Victoria-LPV in the late 80s. He has maintained his advocacy and policy work with both organisations and is currently the NAPWHA representative on the board of the Australian Federation of AIDS Organisations. David was the associate editor of NAPWHA's Positive Living magazine for many years and is the author of an autobiography, Positive. Welcome, David.
Well, welcome, Rick. Thank you for talking to me.
Oh, more than words can't describe. So tell us, David, a little bit about yourself and your journey into, I guess, 1984.
Oh, right. Well, I come from country Victoria, up Numurkah way, northern Victoria. My father was a sheep shearer, and I went to Numurkah High School. And unlike most of my peers, only two of us ended up going to university because we're talking 70s.
Mm.
Most of the local boys and girls would go and join the farm, or the idea of moving to the city in those days was a big deal, whereas nowadays nearly everybody does it, but from the country, I mean. So I went to the city and, discovered my sexuality, really. I wasn't 100% sure what was going on. So I happened to find at this teacher's hostel where we were going to, while we studied at university, a group of, well, we called ourselves the Golden Nine, which was a group of men, gay men, that just happened to fall into each other's company. And they've been the core of my friendship network ever since, which is a delight. I mean, some of them have died, unfortunately, from, HIV and AIDS. So, but as a general rule, those people are still the people I most enjoy going out for, dinner or afternoon tea or something like that. So I then got sent to the country for a couple of years up to Rochester, and then eventually found my way into the writing children's magazines for the education department, which I did for close to 17 years, I think. And then 1984, I was one of the first people to be diagnosed with HIV because the test just became available at the end of 84. And I didn't know what it meant because my doctor said the current medical thinking at that time was that only 1 in 10 people would go on to get AIDS and die, or probably die. And I thought, 1 in 10, I was feeling strong and healthy. And I thought, well, I think I'll be able to live with those odds. So I left his surgery without feeling overwhelmed, although as the 80s unfolded and some of my friends started to die, and the scientists changed their mind and said not 1 in 10, maybe all 10 of people will get AIDS, which of course did happen to me. I ended up with my first AIDS-defining illness in 1989, which is a pneumonia called PCP. It's now called PJP because they've changed the definition, but it nearly killed me. It was a pretty horrible experience. I was, I had no T cells by that stage because HIV obviously, for many people, most people, wears down your T cells unless you've got treatments. And there were no treatments. There were no treatments until 1988 when an experimental drug called AZT came along, which unfortunately stripped all my muscle from my arms and legs. Well, HIV does that too. So I was a bit of a scarecrow. And, that horrible Grim Reaper that we had in 1987, which stuck in people's minds. It only went for 3 weeks, but the Australian community never forgot that image of that Grim Reaper bowling balls at a little 9-year-old girl in pigtails and a family. I mean, outrageously irresponsible health promotion advertising from the federal government. They did not know what they were doing. They thought if you scared the hell out of people, everybody would take notice. And I'm sure people took notice, but in my opinion, as someone who had HIV, it affected me badly because people became scared of people with the virus as opposed to the virus. So if people knew you had the virus, you were in real likelihood of being stigmatized. Sometimes families rejected their family if they, a member of their family, if they knew they were HIV positive. They thought they were dirty, promiscuous, and this was the sort of rubbish that we were getting in the media. There was a magazine called Truth at the time, which was a scandal rag, but some people would see it on the in the newsagents and think, oh my God, look at this. These AIDS people are trying to spread the virus as if it was some sort of deliberate thing. So I can well remember a headline in Truth, sort of probably mid-80s, "Die, you deviant," which was having a go at somebody who had had a blood transfusion and the babies in Queensland. I don't know if you remember that. But
I do. It was horrible, and it was something.
1984, but the media still talked about it for many years afterwards. This person had no knowledge he had HIV. I mean, I didn't know I had it until 84, and I possibly had it since 82 because I had swollen lymph glands for that. That was a sign. But anyway, whatever. People didn't know. And so it was so unfair to criticise people. It's like what's going on with COVID now. People are spreading it without knowing, and it's hard to sort of blame them unless they have deliberately flouted the rules when they know they're positive. That's a different matter. But in terms of HIV, I was part of all those campaigns of the AIDS Council trying to promote safe sex, talking to my fellow positive people about how you protect your partners. It became a big campaign to make sure that, other people didn't get it. And the only way you could get it, of course, as we started to realise and the AIDS Council started to tell people, was through unprotected sex, not protected if you're using condom, needle sharing, or from mother to baby, which was, obviously sex workers too could have unprotected sex, I suppose. So they were the risk groups. So I think the general feeling about who were the target groups became a more important aspect of how the government then, with consultation from the community, changed their approach. Rather than scaring the hell out of everybody, they then decided to talk, I don't know if you remember, an advertising campaign about the beds campaign.
Yes, I do remember that.
Well,
very much so.
Even though some people will argue that wasn't super effective, I personally thought, well, at least they're now talking about how you catch it. And of course, the message from that was if you sleep with someone, who have they slept with before? And there was, 50 or 100 beds in the background. And the message was there, it's about sex. Why they couldn't say that in the Grim Reaper campaign to this day is one of the great, outrages of marketing history, in my opinion, in terms of health campaigns. All they need to say was, if you want to not, get a bowling ball bowled at you by this Grim Reaper, this is what you need to do. Have protected sex, don't share needles,
Mm.
and if there's any issue with hemophilia or whatever, you need to get tested. So look, it was a pretty outrageous time, and a lot of misinformation was being spread. And it was only when the AIDS councils really got a little bit of money from the federal government. You've got to remember the AIDS councils often started in the early 80s, but they were talking to the gay community mainly, of course. And they were getting their message across. They were handing out condoms at dance parties and doing all that work. But in the end, it was only when the federal government decided to put a bit of money behind things that we could then get the messages to the affected communities in a big way and start doing health promotion campaigns and saying, this is the way you can stop HIV. And, a lot of that didn't happen until the 90s. So it was a difficult period because people were dying. And a lot of the efforts of the AIDS Council were trying to support the people who were dying. So a lot of the energies and the resources of the AIDS Councils were put into supporting sick people, and also obviously trying to prevent people from catching the virus. So there was two elements: the support
Mm.
and the prevention. And so there was two different, and they often competed for funds within the AIDS councils themselves, but they were both equally important.
Did you find that during that period of, say, the 90s, when there was that real strong, and I remember the volunteer presence of people wanting to do something and help the community, that there was more of a
No, it was
sense?
incredibly important. Those volunteers, well, three of them virtually helped save my life because they looked after me.
And how did that sort of, at that time, David, we had, there wasn't much, I guess, when I use the word positive, I said role models on television at that time, or people, there wasn't many, we didn't see the impact of HIV as in your Neighbours series or anything on TV portrayed in any sort of positive
No,
light.
that's very true. I think it wasn't really talked about much until, well, probably the 2000s that got into soap dramas, but
Mm.
I'm not 100% sure about that.
No, but for me, it was like, I know with some friends, they were sort of like this, or when will there be like a positive slant on having a healthy sexual relationship with someone who's, HIV positive? That message still was sort of like taboo in some ways within in the community. And
Yes, yes. And look, for a positive person to start a relationship with someone who was HIV negative was inherently risky because if a condom broke,
mm,
there was stress. So I personally made a bit of um, a promise, if you want to call it that, that I wouldn't necessarily have. I would look for a positive partner. That was
mm-hmm,
what I
mm-hmm,
tried to do, so that there would no risk, and
mm-hmm,
we didn't have to use condoms and things.
mm.
And I did have a couple of POS partners, but it does kind of limit your choice. And a lot of people in those days wouldn't get tested. They didn't know if they're positive or not.
Yeah.
They thought, what's the point? There's no effective treatments. Why should I bother? This is the 80s I'm talking about, and the early 90s for that matter, because the treatments weren't very good until 1995 when they started to save people's lives.
I have to agree with you, David. I did get tested until 1994 myself. So for many years, the fear of that Grim Reaper ad really feared me into living my life in such a way I didn't want to know. And I just lived each day because I didn't know what tomorrow was going to bring. So it
Oh,
was that which was, I know it's irrational, but
no,
at
no,
that
no.
time
It's
when I was
not.
young, it
It's
was
a
like,
normal response.
because everywhere around me I was seeing, and that knowing what my family felt, that fear of like, well, if I'm going to die, I'd rather just not have that attached to my back at that moment, because I want to enjoy the day without HIV in my sphere so I can then do what I want to do, and then I'll deal with the consequences tomorrow. So, and I'm wondering if, as you said, some people maybe had that view at that time.
Oh, no question. I think most people had a kind of secret fear, and it, the longer we went, the more people became compassionate towards people with HIV. I mean, in the 80s, I experienced some awful rejection.
Mm,
If you told someone you're positive, you felt a bit of guilt if you didn't tell a sexual partner, because even though you're having safe sex, it's
mm,
sort of like, well, if they discover they'll, when you're having a relationship with, they'll turn on you and it'll be
mm,
awkward. And then they'll blame you for not telling them. So you were caught.
mm,
You didn't want to tell them because you knew it might freak them out and they'd say they'd reject you anyway. But if you didn't, then they're going to reject you eventually and they call you dishonest. So it
mm,
wasn't easy. So that's why I tended to try and focus on other positive people. And I was meeting them. We had a peer
mhm,
support group
mm,
and the AIDS council used to refer to them and we would go away for weekends and talk to each other. But I had never actually found anyone in that group that I wanted to have sex with.
That's
Um,
difficult, isn't it? Because people assume, oh, we've got a whole community, let's put a bunch of people together, and oh, they've all got HIV, therefore they'll just find someone within that
well,
little
yeah,
group.
and that's not necessarily the case. There's got to be a bit of magic in the human
Absolutely.
relationship, and just because you're positive doesn't mean it's going to work. It's just what works with the right people, and it wasn't really until the last 15 years maybe when people with HIV started being treated well.
Mm,
That was more possible, that you could find people willing to have sex with you and not freak out. And really, now in the last 5 to 10 years, that we've discovered that the treatment, if you're on treatments and you're undetectable with your virus, you can't pass it on to a partner. Now that we know that, and there's some bright fellow gay men who are HIV negative who know that, who will respect you and even have unprotected sex with you because they know they can't catch it from you.
mm,
When you meet those kind of people, it's a breath of fresh air, and you
of
say, well,
course.
these people have actually they're up with the latest. They know, or if they are concerned, they can take PrEP. The availability of PrEP has been revolutionary. It's meant that people can protect themselves without having to use condoms,
Mm,
just by taking a pill a day. So the whole world's changed now, and I think the stigma against positive people's remarkably changed. I'm not saying it's gone.
mm,
I do think someone who's diagnosed yesterday might feel a little bit of stigma still, but they can get over that by mixing with other POS people and talking to enlightened negative person who'll say, oh, big deal, forget it, don't worry, it's not a drama. But there's still some ignorance out there that you have to deal with.
absolutely. And David, tell me a little bit about, say, the costs, because one of the things that I remember or I thought of was the cost that would have, at those times in the 80s and 90s with medications. Was it something that was difficult for many people to afford if they weren't working?
Uh, in some respects, I'm not the right person to answer that because I was very lucky. I had a superannuation policy, and when I left my work, because I was a principal level in the education department when I left, I
Oh,
had a fairly decent pension, so I could afford it.
mm-hmm.
But it was on 16, 18 different pills at one stage, and
Oh,
they do cost money. The advantage for me in some of those pills was I was on a lot of clinical trials and they didn't ever charge me for those pills, because it was trial and error. And of course, unfortunately, the problem with that was, groups like AZT, that was all experimental and it,
mm,
ruined my body really forever. So, you go on a clinical trial and you have to sign a thing saying, whatever happens in the future, you're not going to sue us.
Mm.
So, you know, you do all that and you think, well, I'm advancing science if it doesn't help me. But at the same time, it didn't help me. It disadvantaged me considerably now because I've got very bad arthritis and I've needed
Oh.
multiple operations on my knees and shoulders and everything else. So it's not, you know, long term, nobody could have told that those things would happen to me, but only in 96, 95, 96 did get life-saving treatments, and I was lucky enough to stay alive till then because I'd lost
Mhm.
so many friends.
Mm.
So 96, these things called protease inhibitors were revolutionary, but some people still take them, but they lifted my lipids, so my risk of heart attacks, and I introduced diabetes into my system.
Mm.
So by 99, I had diabetes, type 2, which of course is not a good thing.
Mm.
And I started developing all this osteoarthritis. So what happened to me in the 2000s, this is only in the last 10 years, 2013, I developed cancer. And that's from all the inflammatory stuff going in your body after all those years. So I had a lymphoma and that nearly killed me. I was 3 weeks in ICU at the Alfred, and fortunately they saved my life when they called my family and said he's not going to make it through the night. But
Oh.
I did.
You've survived, David. You have survived.
And then I had a heart attack in 2017 and I got a stent put in.
Mm.
So that were the two big things that have happened to me in the last 10 years. But look, overall, I'm all right as long as you said, the cost. Well, it is costly. I have to take, I'm still on 16 pills, different ones, but
Mm.
it does cost money. And I think people on disability pension or even worse, a unemployment benefit, because not everyone who's got HIV these days gets disability pension, and
Mm.
they're much tougher. Will go on something, amount of money that's going to save them from cost, but there are various schemes the government runs, like if you get too much by September, October, or whatever that scheme's called.
Oh, yes, the medium.
Yeah, the more
Yeah.
you then get them free, or in my case, you get them at the rate of someone on a disability pension about October. Once you've spent so much, it's
Mm-hmm.
a safety net.
Yeah, the safety net. Yes.
So those things help, but you still got to have the capital up front.
Mm. I wanted. I was going to ask you too. The book you've written, the autobiography, Positive. Tell me, has that changed at all? Yes, thank you. It's lovely. Can you tell me a little bit about it? Has it changed the way you go look back at your past events in your life, or has it affirmed how you feel you've
Very
always?
good question, Rick. I was reading it just before this in preparation because, obviously I've changed some of my impressions since then because of, PrEP and, there's less stigma and I don't feel difficulty with sexual relationships like
Mm-hmm.
I would have even in when I was writing that, there would have been some dramas. And I have developed a relationship with an Indonesian man since, unfortunately, because of COVID, he can't come here at the moment.
Oh.
But, I really hadn't experienced what I call a long-lasting romantic relationship until well, 2017 I met him.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's been lovely and that
Oh.
has made a difference to me. But look, um, I'm very pleased I wrote it for my own benefit because I can reflect back and think, oh, things have changed. Well,
Mm.
things were really grim before, because of course I talk about my early childhood and what you went through as a gay man living in the country, and that in
Mm-hmm.
its own way kind of teaches you a certain resilience to be able to cope with some of the slings and arrows that you're going to cop, even though it's not easy. But being a gay man, um, you have to learn to cop some criticism,
Mm-hmm.
or stigma, or whatever you want to call it, and be able to deal with people, in a, what's the word, a pleasant way.
Mm.
Anyway, look, I think over the years, HIV's made things a little bit harder, but in a strange way, being open about my status has made me feel more confident about myself, my true self, the
Mm-hmm.
fact that I can be totally honest, and people can either take me or leave me.
Mm.
And I've got much, much more support than I have any kind of rejection or criticism. When I first did something in the media, which was about, would have been 91 or something. Well, probably before that, but 91 was the big one, where people living with AIDS were trying to get a positive living centre for ourselves.
Mm.
And I was the president, and myself and a woman called Joan Golding has unfortunately passed on. Um, we decided that we were going to front the media, which was a big thing,
Mm.
because before I did that, there were a couple of people who'd done a little bit of media, but it was usually the president of an AIDS council, who usually wasn't a positive man, that they were there to do prevention work particularly, but also to do care. So it wasn't people with AIDS speaking for themselves. And now we had this new organisation, which was only really started in late 80s, early 90s, People Living with AIDS Victoria. Here we had a live one, a real one, standing up and saying, I've got HIV. Shock horror. Well, there wasn't that much shock horror. And I thought, and it was lovely, I just thought the local Caulfield leader would come and do something, because we were trying to get a property in Dandenong Road, and the neighbours and had caused hysteria. How
Oh.
dare these people with AIDS set up next to us? We're not having this. So they went to the council, and of course our application got thrown out. But not before we put up a fight. So we went to this place, and the owner was very happy to have us, because we were willing to pay the rent, and a lovely garden and everything.
Mm.
But the we just thought the Caulfield leader would turn up and that'd be it. But no, we got SBS, Channel 7, Channel 10, all the newspapers, the Age, the Herald Sun. Well, I can't remember who else, but we had so much media. It was like we were stars all of a sudden. We thought, am I Tom Hanks or something? So Joan and I did this piece, and there's a lovely photo of us up the top of the house sitting. They took it from outside. And I don't know where it is. I was looking for it to show you, but
I do remember that. You know what, David? Oh my gosh, I remember that, and it was on quite a few different media papers.
yeah,
Oh
no, it would
yes,
have been. It was a nice photo. It was just us sitting.
yeah.
Anyway, look, and what I'm saying is the media who a few years before, different media, but it said, die you deviant, now we're doing sensitive, sympathetic stories. And that story was lovely. It painted us as just trying to have our own place that we could meet each other and, get tips on how to live well and stuff like that. It was a very sensitive article, and that was I think, a change, that they decided, the media, that these people don't deserve to be bashed over the head anymore.
Mm.
They are not. doing anything particularly in any way damaging to society, and they can't pass it on casually. So that I think was, for me anyway, that was a change in the attitude, and I have had nothing pretty much ever since but sympathetic journalists. And I think if they weren't, I'd tell them where to go.
David, that was, and I remember incredible. I remember reading that article a little bit, but I remember the image, and your smile. I think
And do you remember this image? Oh, can you see that?
yes.
Oh,
Oh
you
my
can't
gosh, I
see.
do.
But that's
Oh wow.
age.
Oh my gosh. That
Yeah,
yes.
that's
Oh,
me with Sonia Ristoff and Michael Rogerson, two straight. Well, she wasn't
wow. Yeah.
straight. Standing in Faulkner Park.
How was that?
That that was the
The
front
year?
page of the magazine, for goodness
Was
sake.
that 2000 something, or was that
No,
before?
1995.
Oh yes.
Unfortunately, both Michael and Sonia have died since, but
Oh,
we were talking about the new generation of drugs.
mm.
And
I remember that, David, so clearly.
that's pretty open, and it's on the front page.
Absolutely proud one. I would have hoped that you put that up in a nice frame because I
Oh,
love
well,
that
I sent
picture.
it in my file. I don't know about it.
Wow, David, there's so many. And I must say, it's been so wonderful speaking with you about your life journey. And I hope we could perhaps do another one another time, because I'd also like to speak to you about your days as a teacher. Oh, that's a nice one.
Well, that was 10
Oh,
years,
viewers, you must
10
see that
years
picture.
later, and this, believe it or not, is the Australian.
Oh, you're kidding. The Australian had a nice
And they called it Staying Alive, the same as the Age called that one on the front page. But
Oh,
they're quite pretty photos, and there's a couple. A
that's a
woman.
beautiful one of you, David. I love that blue one of the nice flowers. Was that done in your home, or did they send you to a studio for that picture?
That's a really good question. Wow.
I just visualized you having like lots of nice plants around you.
What did I say? 2000.
I would have thought it would have been, yeah,
I think I was
1999, or yeah,
in
maybe.
Elwood then. Oh gosh, I don't remember where it was. But they put up a canvas thing to, the
Mm,
photographer did that. I'm trying to remember where that wisteria was.
mm. Oh, I love it. I love plants. So it just sort of symbolizes you, that the beauty from within, and it comes out, David, every time you speak and everything you write. And I'm excited because I have ordered your book, so I'm going to read through
Oh
it
gosh, I'm
because
sorry,
for
Rick.
me,
It'll take over a month. They're hopeless. Who did you order it?
oh, I can't remember, it's Angus and Robertson,
Booktopia.
or one of the, we have book, might have been Booktopia, but for me, I wanted to hear it because it will take me back to those times, of Melbourne, and going back from some of those emotions that I experienced and that you would have experienced at that time, because it's important. And I guess as we finish up this interview, I want to I guess, what message would you like to leave, I guess, to the younger people who, we're hearing stories at the moment that was quoted to say about looking at eradicating AIDS within a number of years. What does that mean for terms of the legacy and footprints of those who have come before, if there comes a time when AIDS does become just another it gets eradicated? What would you like to
Well,
people to know?
I'd make a comment to both ends of the spectrum, to young people, uh, whether they've got HIV, whether they're GLBTI or not, that and older people, that you need to respect each other's experience. I think that some people have a view that young people don't understand what we've been through, which is to some degree true and understandable because, you know, HIV's moved on. People don't have the same scaredness around it because we've got it pretty well under control. We haven't got a cure yet. But equally to older people, I would say, you need to respect younger people for who they are. And, you know, it's not about their ignorance. It's about you establishing a rapport with them so you can tell them about that period. So they will learn that understanding the history means you can come closer together and you can understand the newer generation's views about things, but it will help them to understand their history and to appreciate that understanding and reading about your history is a valuable thing to do because it sort of enriches your life and it realizes that there are people around you that have fought for them, but equally you might have some adversity in your future. And you know, the gay community, the GLBTI community could very well be one of your go-tos that can help you understand how you can get through a crisis, you know, and we are here for each other, or we should be. And you can always find mental health support often from a gay, lesbian, GLBTI person too, who will have understood all the issues you've been through. So.
David Menadue, it's been an absolute pleasure in sharing some of those wonderful memories that you've shared with us. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you, Ricky. Again, I think I must have met you before somewhere.